that can impact a bit of the content and cause some changes to occur. But what I think you can take away is that the structure is pretty solid. That I don't see that changing. Some of the minor detail might, but the high level we're going to walk through today has met with a lot of review, a lot of feedback, and we've gotten pretty good consensus around all of that. So I think, again, the structure and the core content is not likely to change, but some of the detail could. So just know that we're not quite finished, and we're not yet able to give a publication date for when it will be available. But we are certainly planning this year, and all of us are anticipating soon, please, soon, please. So we'll see how that goes. And I think say one other thing. I'm going to talk factually about things that went into the development process of this standard and this guide. And I will talk about factually about the content, but you will be asking questions that are going to ask my opinion. And so know that that's my opinion. I'm not speaking at that point for PMI. So with that said, let's jump in to one other issue that has come up, and we've seen this for a while. It's because of timing. We're seeing it more prevalent today, but for those of you who are preparing for the PMP exam, or know of others who are preparing for the PMP, the first thing out of the gate is to say that PMP exam, which launched at the first of this year, continues to use the 6th edition as one of the references for the exam. But I think more importantly, it's to make sure that candidates understand that the PMP exam is not based on any one single publication. It's based on the exam content outline. And that content outline tells you specifically what tasks are going to be questioned or tested during the exam process. So the 6th edition of the PMBOK guide is one of several references that can be used, and we think it's an excellent one, obviously. But there are others. So it's not, when we do publish the 7th, it's not going to trigger an exam change because the exam's not based on the PMBOK guide. It's based on this exam content outline. So I want to make sure that we've got that understanding up front, because that hopefully for those who may be candidates for the exam, you can now exhale and we can move through the rest of the content. You can see how that is changing. But if you do want more details on the exam, the place to go for that is pmi.org/certifications. So before I go to the content, I think it's helpful to kind of understand some of the things that led to the change. And we recognize this is a pretty dramatic change in the way the content is being put together. The last several editions have been what we call incremental revisions. So the common structure of the content really didn't change. You started to see some significant addition in the 6th edition, where the content and all the knowledge areas began to point out what the new trends are in project management and called attention to what's changing in the world of project management. And as we came to the 7th edition, we've really seen a leap in the amount of change going on. So I want to kind of talk through what drove us as we were beginning this work. And the first one was, you may be familiar with, in 2017, PMI released its new strategic plan, which was an update of the plan that I think had been in existence since 2011, if I recall correctly. But the board and the leadership of PMI really spent a lot of time looking at the landscape. What's the environment that we are in today? How is that changing? And how does that impact PMI as an organization? And how does that open up opportunities where we need to be moving to better support our stakeholders, our practitioners in this field? And so, some of the things that go without saying, we know speed of change is very high, and it continues to go faster. we've been seeing trend for a while that we're moving more and more to global market competition. Just the internet alone has made it possible for a worldwide marketplace to easily be entered simply by standing up a website. And the reality is organizations have to adjust to this rapid change in this global market competition environment. And the way they do that, obviously, is through new strategic work. And we know that strategic work and their strategy is accomplished through projects. And therefore, the organizations are looking to projects to absolutely deliver results and to do it faster. So what's the impact on work? Well, there's more emphasis now from a project standpoint on leadership and strategy. It doesn't diminish the need for technical skills. It's just saying layering on, there's more and more a need for leadership and more for an understanding of strategy and how that impacts the work of the project and how the work of the project impacts the strategy. It's changing the way work gets done. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. But we're seeing technological solutions change the way we work. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's coming fast enough that it's hard to get your arms around it. Just when you think you've got it mastered, it evolves again and you got to start over. So continuous learning is certainly an element here, and it's one that the board recognized, and it's one that PMI is trying to step aggressively into to help, again, practitioners adjust and respond. And so lastly, functional roles and responsibilities continue to change as the nature of the work changes. So that's how the strategic plan kind of informed some of the work that went into pre-work that went into this update. There were also a lot of research that was done, and I'm going to talk about just these three pieces quickly that are PMI research projects, but they hit on some key themes, and we're seeing it elsewhere. So I don't want to give the impression that when the research was being done, it was all around PMI's research. It wasn't. We looked at a much broader input than just PMI research. But just out of this, one of the things, or some of the things that we saw was there's this whole idea of we have moved fully into a project economy. And again, we're talking about things around globalization. We're talking about things around technological evolution. We're talking about global climate change as an issue. You're probably familiar with the UN's principles of global impact. All of that is going to cause additional project work. And so that's what coined the phrase, we are really in the project economy now. The second one was the future of work. The Pulse did a deep dive into this area and started to call out the need for a technological quotient for the project manager and anyone involved in the work of the project. And the idea here is that, one of the things we're seeing and that was called out in this research was artificial intelligence is actually becoming a real thing. I know I started hearing about it roughly 10 years ago. And at the time it sounded very sci-fi, but I wear this watch on my arm that I remember cartoons talking about in the 1950s and some guy named Dick talking into it, and we laughed. It's real, right? It's been real for a while. And I think the same thing's happening with artificial intelligence. And what I see it doing, and PMI is continuing to do research work in this space, but what I see it doing is offloading the things that are very repetitive, predictive, kind of, that can be done in software. And when you do that, you open up the ability of the project team members to do what AI hasn't been able to do yet, and that's think critically. And so I think the pairing together is going to be a good thing. We're not there yet, but you're probably beginning to see elements of that already show up in your day-to-day work. And then lastly, there was just idea of identifying new ways of working and cultivating next practices. And one of the themes that emerged there is this idea of leading. What has been often termed power skills in the past might have been called soft skills. I think soft gives the wrong kind of implication for that. I prefer power skills because they're really the way things get moved and things get done. And so, that's just one piece of the puzzle, but it comes together when you start looking at all the research and saying things are changing fairly significantly. What does that mean for the standard for project management, and what does that mean for the PMBOK guide? So in addition to looking at published research, we also do ongoing research through surveys and focus groups, et cetera. This time around, we also started conducting a number of workshops, and I'll talk about those as well in more detail. But these three themes came out of some very focused focus group research that we did. And the first one was every one of the groups that we pulled together came to this statement: maintain and enhance the credibility and the relevance of the PMBOK guide. Secondly, we need it to be easier to read, and we need it to be more useful on the job. Avoid overstuffing it. And I think we saw that as a trend. If you just look at page count from PMBOK guide, I don't know, say third edition, which I think was around 200 pages maybe, and look at each subsequent edition, and what we saw is we kept layering more and more information in to the point where it was getting difficult to find what you needed. And so that caused us to give pause and take a step back and say, is there a better way? Rather than adding more pages, because we know there's more things you need to be aware of. And that's what led to this third area that started to emerge in this focus group research as well. And that is, man, if you could give us a digital platform, some kind of content that supports practical application, but have that information fully vetted. We want it to supplement the standard, we want it to supplement the guide, but we want to make sure, again, it goes back to this idea that it's credible. And so the information needs to be fully vetted. And I'll talk about how we got to that towards the end, but all three of these drove the chartering of this project to do this update. So I'm going to give you a very, very high level look first at changes, and I can't go through this whole thing. As you can see in the lower left there, this is available on our content hub for this project. And so you're free to go there and download this so you can read it in more detail. What I'd like to do is just call out two items on this list. So on the left side is description of the 6th edition. On the right-hand side, what we're doing stuff. And the first one is the application of the project, the application of the work. So if you look at the 6th edition, it starts out by saying this is applicable to most projects most of the time. And the challenge to the 7th edition development team was that's not good enough. It has to apply to any project and all projects, regardless of delivery approach, regardless of life cycle, regardless of framework, regardless of methodology. What we put together has to be applicable to all projects. That doesn't mean you necessarily will use every single thing, but it could be. And so that was a key shift in the direction for the development team who did the work in developing this. The other is a target audience. I want to call out that if, as you read through the 6th edition, it keeps addressing the project manager, and the project manager needs to, and the project manager should. And that's good, and that doesn't go away. But the development team was challenged again to say, expand it. It has to be relevant for anyone on the project team or anyone doing work related to the project, which obviously includes product owner, sponsor, or whatever. So it's whoever is influencing or has is being influenced by the project, who's working on the project, they should find relevance in this new update. And so it changed kind of the way some of the information was put forward, but it also caused the team to think broader, think outside of just the project manager. In fact, it was interesting as the work was evolving. We started to hear a kind of a common mantra from development team members that began to challenge one another with this idea of manage projects, lead people. You don't manage people, you lead people, you manage the project. And so that starts to come across in the writing as you see that develop. So that's a quick high-level look at a comparison between the two. Obviously, there's some other points, and you'll see those as we move along. So another piece I talked about, the workshops that we conducted. This was a real global effort. So we started out with some workshops where we were trying to get the practitioners to draw out what they would tell their former selves or their younger selves about what's really important about the work of project management. So if I said to myself 10 years ago, what could I go back and tell myself that would have better prepared me for today? And so we started with that. And the reason was we were trying to get at the core of what is really important in the project work. Is it that it's really important to do a work breakdown structure? Well, in some cases, yes, but not necessarily in all, and they don't all look the same. So get behind that, get underneath that. What is really important to the work of project management? So we started conducting these workshops around the globe. Then as the content started shape, we took that input, we started to work with it. We began to then take that back out in those same workshops. We would then start to put forward some concepts that we were working with and get feedback and validation that we were hitting the target. So that was the global reach of the workshops. But in addition, we not only had the development team, but you'll see that we had a number of reviewers. Again, there was over 70 contributing experts from around the world. And 500 plus reviewers of the standard. So there was a lot of global input into this, and development process looked like this. So we started with all those inputs I talked about, all the research, all the workshops that started off early. And so the development team would begin to draft sections of the standard or sections of the guide. As they got that section drafted and they felt like they had a pretty good draft. They knew it wasn't perfect, but it was a solid draft. And before we put a lot more effort into it, we wanted to get that reviewed. And so that went to what we called fondly Review Team 1, which is about 35 or so subject matter experts who would look at that single piece of content. When I say piece of content, is a section out of the standard or a section out of the guide. That feedback came back in, and the development team then analyzed that, revised the work, and began to put sections or of the guide or the standard together. And once we had that put together as a full draft, that went back to a second review team, which had another roughly 35 subject matter experts from around the world, cross industry, various levels of expertise in different development approaches for projects, etc. They did their work. They gave us feedback. The development team took that, revised again to encompass all of that feedback. Then we took the standard out for what we call public exposure draft and said, okay, public, now help us draft this standard. And we sent that out, and we had over 500 participants help shape the revision to the final draft of the standard. That has gone now into the standards process, and that's where we're continuing to move forward, letting that run through its complete process, because the standard has to undergo very robust process to make sure we got it right. If we're calling it a standard, it needs to be recognized as such. So that was kind of the process. We took a very iterative development approach this time around. Rather than trying to write everything up front and then rewrite it, we started writing in sections and have the development team put that together and then get the reviewers' input. So that's all of the things, well, some of the things that led to the change. and how that change was implemented into the charter for this project work. And so before I go further, I'll pause there, Doug, to see if we have any questions.
I don't see any in the chat. So go ahead and continue on. And just a reminder for everybody attending, if you do have any questions, feel free to jot them down in the chat, or when we come to another section like this break, feel free to raise your hand and we'll call on you.
Okay, well, then let's move on. Well, let's talk about the standard for project management and that work. And before we do that, we said, well, you keep switching back and forth, you're saying the standard of the guide, standard of the guide. Which one are you talking about? Well, both are put together and bound into one publication, but there are two very separate documents, and we want to make sure that we're clear on that. The standard carries the American National Standards Institute imprimatur, because it goes through the full ANSI standards process. So the standard is where we begin, and then the guide builds on that, and it's a guide to the project management body of knowledge. It is not intended to be exhaustive. There is no way in print you could do an exhaustive body of knowledge, but we want to give guidance. And so as I move through, I'm going to talk about the standard, and then I'll shift very clearly. I'll indicate when I'm going to start talking about the guide portion. So just keep in mind, two separate documents. We just bind them for convenience because they are so closely related to each other. So what's in the standard? Well, there's no surprise here. Of the three major segments in the standard, we start with an introduction, and really that's fairly straightforward. Although I will be honest and say our development team didn't get that right. Even the introduction had to undergo some changes based on feedback, because it defines what the purpose of the standard is. That was fine. It defines the audience, and remember I said it's now broadened out to include anyone involved with the project. That was fine. But what was very clear to the development team, I'm sure, was some of the common terms that they were starting to use right off the bat. And so feedback from the review process. You know what? You really need to define these key terms and concepts up front so that the reader has that context before they start reading. It's like, duh, you think? So that's what's in the introduction. So then we move into the second major section. It's called a system for value delivery. The terminology is new, the concept is not. But what we're trying to do here is begin to put a brighter light on the fact that projects don't exist in isolation. They are part of a system. And as part of a system, that means that one change in one element has impact in other elements. And you really have to look at the project as part of a much, much larger system and understand how those points of influence are going both ways. The project influencing other parts of the elements of the system, and other elements of the system influencing the project. So the value delivery system talks about the ultimate goal here is creating value. How that value is defined and measured, that can vary, but it's about creating value. You don't spend the money and personnel time to develop a project that doesn't do anything. So what's the value proposition, and how does this project enable that value to be realized? That's the important piece. And so in part of that, you'll see there's an organizational governance system, and that has influence on the project, obviously, and the project can further influence the governance system. There are many, many functions in projects, and roles and titles may vary, but these core functions are taking place in the project. So the standard in the section 2 begins to define what those core functions are, regardless of how they might be combined, separated, titled, or whatever. Then we look at the project environment. And lastly, the section looks at an area that we've been seeing for a while, which is the blurring of the lines between project and product, and program and product. And so it just gives some considerations to see where there's very much an overlap in how they may work together. We know that products are developed through projects, but it's the idea that not everybody realizes what they're doing is a project. And how's this influenced in program? And what about continuous evolution of product? How does that work in a project environment or a projectized organization? So this section talks about that, the need for clarity there, and the fact that the lines are very blurred, but we're all working towards the same end. So that's section 2. Third section is defines out project management principles. Well, what are principles? Well, in a nutshell, principles are what guide your behavior and actions. It's not a code of conduct. It's not a code of ethics, although it can feel like that at some times. So this aligns with PMI's Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct, for instance. Doesn't contradict that, but it's not replicating. It's talking about what is key to projects and why is that important. And so the 12 principles are described in more detail. So I'll stop there again. So wait, hold on. I put that divider in the wrong spot. Sorry. I want to finish this and then I'll come back. So let me talk a bit more about principles, give you an example. It always helps to see one or two. So principles are, here's the way that they were defined as the development team was working through trying to figure these out. And how many are there? First of all, they're actionable. They are not neutral. They are not platitudes. They are actionable statements. They have to be culturally neutral. Can't be, yeah, that's true in a Western culture, but in Eastern culture, that wouldn't be true. Had to be across all cultures. It's important to understand these principles can be realized in different ways. So it's not telling you how to do this. It's not telling you how to fulfill the principle. It's telling you what is the principle, why is it important. So in doing that, it provides clear guardrails to the work of the project and across its entire life cycle. It also means these principles apply regardless of the delivery approach that you are using for the project in hand, right? So let me give you an example. We'll start with this one. And the first thing to note is there's a label that we shorten to effectively engage with stakeholders, but you may even hear shorter. It's the principle, stakeholder principle. Well, that's a label. That's not the principle. What follows is the principle statement itself. Engage stakeholders proactively and to the degree needed to contribute to project success and customer satisfaction. So you see a very strong what and how you're going to know that that's being achieved. All right, let me give you another example. Focus on value. So again, often this is going to get shortened to a label of the value principle. That's fine, but no, that's not the principle. Value is not a principle. The principle is continually evaluate and adjust project alignment to the business objectives and intended benefits and value. So that's a principle statement that then is elaborated for a few pages to make sure that it's clearly conveyed as to what is entailed in that principle. So that's the principles. That's 2 of them, and as I said, there are 12 that are in the standard. So now let me pause there before we jump to the guide and see if we have any additional questions yet.
Marvin, we do not at this time just yet.
You can make one up so I can get a short drink here. It's amazing to me how dry you get when you're talking.
Yeah, we're just soaking it all in.
All right, or I'm boring you to death. Let's talk about the guide. Again, there are 3 major sections, and the guide starts off with casting what they call 8 project performance domains. What these are groups of activities. Often you'll see a dictionary definition of domain as being an area of focus or a collection. And that's the idea here. Domain is a very neutral word until we put these are project performance domains. So these are groups of activities. The key here is that these domains interact. They are interrelated, and they're very much interdependent. But again, what the development team was driving to is get the systems thinking in place. Understand that when you make an adjustment or a change in one of these domains, how that's impacting the whole system that's trying to work together to produce a deliverable that enables an outcome. And so you'll see structure in here as it defines the work within performance domains, that it begins to shift focus to outcomes. And it does so in two ways. First of all, the collective project performance domains help to put the focus on enabling the outcomes that the project was undertaken to achieve. So we know as good project managers, we have never thought about just delivering a project output. We're always trying to make that project fit for use. We're always trying to make that project perform what it was intended to perform. What this is doing is making sure that stays front and center. Again, there was a value proposition at some point in someone's mind that commissioned this work and is funding it. What was it that we're trying to achieve? And when you take that and you're working in those project performance domains, it helps you put the focus past just those immediate area of focus and say, if we did this, what would be the impact on the overall outcome once this project is deployed or a piece of this project is deployed? And so that's one aspect. The other aspect is all well and good that you define 8 performance domains, but how do you know if the work in those performance domains are performing to the degree that you expected? And so it looks at outcomes of each of the domains and sets up the beginnings of what you can develop into a checklist. That's just a gut check. Are we achieving this? Is this working? Do we need to rethink something? And so again, let me show you the 8 project performance domains that are defined here. And I'll pull one of them out to show you the more detail. But these are the 8. And very quickly you could go to the right side here and you see development approach and life cycle. So a decision in what type of development approach certainly is going to have implications for measurement, certainly going to have implications for delivery, certainly going to have implications for project work. Uncertainty may come back and influence the development approach or adjustments to a life cycle. So that's the interactive and interrelatedness that you see across all 8 of these. And those are called out specifically in the guide. So it's not trying to be exhaustive, but it's saying, boy, in particular, just like I did, you make a decision here, watch for the interaction in these other domains. Again, it's this idea of applying systems thinking to the entire work of the project. So here's an example of a performance domain. So on the left side, you see the definition of what it is. So it addresses activities and functions associated with stakeholders. Okay, I get that. But on the right side, here's what we desire as an outcome. If we're performing well in the stakeholder performance domain, then we can measure productive working relationship with stakeholders throughout the project, stakeholder agreement with the project objectives to the extent possible. Stakeholders who are project beneficiaries are supportive and satisfied, and stakeholders who may oppose the project or its deliverables at least do not negatively impact the project outcomes. So that's stated up front. Then the discussion takes place at the end of each of these domains. We circle back to that and say, here are some ways you can check this. Now, again, it's not saying you have to do this, and it's not saying this is complete. It's saying, here are some things to start your thinking on how you're going to make sure that you're really firing well in the stakeholder performance domain or in the uncertainty domain. So that's an example of what we mean by performance domains and how they fit together. So the second section of the guide is devoted to tailoring. And what you saw in the 6th edition is that tailoring was addressed in pieces across all of the knowledge areas. But the development team really felt strongly, we need this pulled together, and we've got to really strengthen the focus on tailoring. And so they pulled together a framework that includes key questions that help the team tailor their processes and tailor their artifacts, etc., to the unique characteristics of the project. This doesn't replace organizational guidance. Guidance from the organization will tell you to what extent can you actually tailor, and you may find ways of tailoring that actually go back and influence the organizational guidance over time. But the idea is put together a framework that helps think through the tailoring process. And this is a very quick look at what takes probably 15 pages to really work through, but this is the framework that is being worked. That you start with, for instance, select your initial development approach, tailor that for the organization and the organization environment, tailor that for the project, and then the last step never ends. Inspect and adapt, inspect and adapt. So I always use the example, I've worked on a project where there was this particular ceremony that was included, and we would just faithfully and dutifully fulfill that every couple of weeks. And I came to a point and I said, are we getting any value out of this? Do we need to change this? And we tailored. We said, this is not doing anything for us. What do we need? And let's make it work for us. And that's one aspect of tailoring your processes, to make sure in an ongoing improvement method or a process that you're adapting and keep tailoring where you can tailor. So that takes us to the third major section, which we titled Models, Methods, and Artifacts. Here we're listing a bunch of these types of things and providing a high-level description. And the point is, all of these things, these models, methods, and artifacts, and I'll give you some examples in a second, really are a means to an end. And it's too easy to fall into the trap of thinking they are the end. They are the means to the end, and therefore they can be tailored and should be tailored. They should only be used if they are contributing value to the project work. If they're not contributing value, they're draining your time and energy. They could be draining financial resources, and et cetera. So what we did is, so we want to introduce a lot more in the terms of models, methods, and artifacts without overstuffing. Remember that note at the beginning that stakeholders said, don't overstuff this. So how can we do this? We need to get a robust description so that you've got an introduction to something you may not know about, like the Oscar model. I said, well, that's interesting. I want to know a little bit more about that. So what we've done is say, okay, let's move all of the how-to, the deep dive into what is this model or what is this artifact. Let's move that to a digital platform where it can grow organically. So as the practice itself changes, we're able to very quickly make a change. In print, you can't do that. It may be 4 to 5 years before the next cycle comes out. We finished development work early or along the about the middle of last year. The development work was coming to an end, and so you can see now we're about 7 months later. Things are already changing, and it's why it was important. In print, doesn't change. We need to make sure this stays relevant for a long period of time, but we need a way to keep current. And so that's moving to this new platform called PMI Standards Plus, and I will come back to that at the end and talk about what that's trying to do. But we fondly refer to it how to in practice. It's more than that. In fact, all of the library of PMI standards and guides are being dropped in here. So you will be able to find specific pieces from the book without opening the book. So if you are looking for critical path method description and trying to answer something that you used to know, you thought you knew, want to know, it's on the digital platform. So you can first read it in the guide, but then you can also say, okay, use that as my search term and show me what you've got. And it will then produce those results. So I'll talk about that a little bit more, but that's the idea. So when we say models, methods, and artifacts, these are just a few examples of what is included. So you know about situational leadership, you know about communications models, you know about change models and bridges and Cotter and ADCAR. I mean, there are a lot of change models. And so that's what we mean. It's a way of thinking through an issue or a task in front of you. Methods are how you then go about doing that. So data gathering and analysis, you have been doing that for a long time. Well, we're going to call out what some of those are, like 3-point estimating. Well, it will be described here very briefly, but remember, PMI Standards Plus will have a deep dive, and we'll show you how that might be applied in different scenarios, in different industries, etc. And then on the right side, the artifacts section, are talking about things. Many of them we know, logs and registers. Everybody knows about a risk register. Know about the project management plan, the scope management plan, et cetera, et cetera. So those are all artifacts of the project. And so those are briefly described again with more detail available in PMI Standards Plus. So that's the standard and the guide, and I think it's helpful to put it together into one view that captures all of this. If we start with the standard, remember we said those principles guide behavior. And what you're seeing is this value delivery system that we've described, shown in a slightly different manner, but it still has those elements. It's sitting in the project operates in an internal environment, in the organization in this case that's undertaking the work. But that organization sits in an external environment, and that has impact on the work of the project, and the project may have impact on that external environment. So this whole system for value delivery then begins to be implemented through these 8 project performance domains. And so you see those areas of focus is shifting as you're going along through the project work. Right now, you might be focused on, I need to do some more work with stakeholders. And tomorrow you come back and sit down, you say, I've got to pull together some measurement reports. The idea is that these become areas of focus that you can shift your attention to, but you're always looking at driving to an outcome from that domain and driving all 8 with a view to enabling outcomes. Then you see around that models and methods are how this work gets done. Artifacts are used as inputs and outputs. There are deliverables that occur, and all of this is tailored to fit the project context. So that's how the standard and the guide link up and work together to achieve what we set out to do with the project, and that is create some type of new value. So let me recap this migration, and then I will pause again. So the standard itself has been organized around process groups. It's moving to principles as its core organizing attribute. The process groups don't go away. You actually will see those still in the guide in one of the models. Process groups are a model for doing the process, for doing the work of the project. So they don't go away, they've moved. But the idea, again, in the standard was get the focus on this concept of a system with interacting parts that are influencing each other. So create a systems view and manage with that in mind. The guide moves from knowledge areas to project performance domains, in some ways for the same reason, to get the system view, understand how it's working, how these areas interact, interrelate, influence each other, but get a systems view that looks towards delivering the value in the long term. So the project may close well before the full value is realized, but if you've got a good grasp of the value, what the outcome is intended, you have stand a better chance of that project producing that value. So that's just structural changes. The content shifts, obviously, but both of these enabled us to achieve that initial objective that the development team undertook, and that was all projects, all the time. Not most, all projects, all the time. And so this gave the framework to do that. And so you now see that this is applicable across all. Doesn't recommend one over any other development approach. It doesn't recommend one tool over another tool. It's just saying, here are the things to be considering. Here's how they work. Now, go forth, look at the project, and start to select and put together what makes sense for the project. And then lastly, move the how-to content into something that's more dynamic and that can respond faster to changes. And so that's PMI Standards Plus, which we stood up as a product at the end of last year, and it's not done. It will undergo continuous update, and that has been taking place over a period of time already. So it's fairly robust, but now they're starting to incorporate more of the standards and guides from the PMI library, and they're also continuing to develop original content. And I'll talk more about that in just a minute. All of this information is contained in bits and pieces on our content hub, which is the URL that you see at the bottom there. If you go to pmi.org/standards-projects, you'll find that chart that I started off with, comparing 6th and 7th edition, which is just a real high-level summary. It certainly is detailed, but you will also see we've been doing webinars over the last 7 or 8 months now. Those are available on demand at projectmanagement.com, and you'll see a listing on that website with hot links so that you can just jump right to it. So if you want to know more about the project performance domains, there was a webinar where we did a deep dive into those domains. If you want to know more about the principles, there's a webinar that did a deep dive into the 12 principles. So that's one way to start to get more depth if you're interested in any or all of those. There are also some of these graphics that I've been using are taken from elements that we've used to create interactive PDF graphics. And so again, for instance, I need a handy quick reference for the project performance domains because I can't remember all 8 of those. Well, there's a PDF there. Go ahead, grab it, download it, and it's clickable. So you can click in the stakeholder domain and it will pop you into a brief description of that domain. You can pop click on uncertainty and it will pop up a definition. So I encourage you to go look at that. Know that that's where the latest information is. We update that at least every other week as new information becomes available. And for those who are now waiting with bated breath for the release, that's where we will put the first mention of when the release date is, once we know what that's going to be. So again, let me pause and then I will talk just very briefly about Standards Plus.
All right. Yeah, so Marvin, we do have a couple questions. One that you mentioned real briefly, touched on, is implementation date. What can we expect? What are you guys at PMI anticipating?
We're anticipating publishing in 2021. The reason we can't give a date is that I said the standard goes through a rigorous process, and we don't necessarily dictate that, right? We know what the process is, has to go through that. Sometimes it goes quick, sometimes it doesn't, and we're in the final stages of that. But once we've got to get to the end, we've got to make sure this standard has met all the criteria for a standard, and then we can set the publication date.
Okay, thanks for that. And then another question kind of go along that line is, for those that are anticipating testing, how does the 7th edition impact when, if they anticipate testing in 2021, are they going to be required to go off of the 7th edition or still the 6th edition?
Yeah. And again, I'll state it's not based on the PMBOK guide. So the fact that PMBOK guide changes will not change the exam. The exam is based on the exam content outline. And if you're not looking at that outline, you're not going to be well prepared for the exam. So start there, continue to use the 6th edition. Content will be relevant. Eventually, once we publish the 7th edition, The CERT team has told me they will replace it. They will place the 7th edition as a reference, right? So it will go in the reference list. Didn't change a single question in the exam when they do that. It's just saying, here's an updated reference. Just like I wrote the big book of all project information and knowledge ever assembled in one volume, and I just updated it to the 2nd edition. Well, that didn't change what I had in the 1st edition, which was used to validate questions in the exam. So the fact that I published the 2nd edition has information, but it didn't change the exam. And that's the idea, that the exam is based on developing questions. Those questions are then validated with at least 2 references. And so the 7th edition publishes, you're not going to see an exam change. You may see questions that get validated with content from the 7th edition, but that question exists in the exam, excuse me, because it directly is testing one of those task areas in the exam content outline. So start with the exam content outline. Do not start with PMBOK guide or my big book of all knowledge of projects. That's not the place. Look at the exam content outline, or ECO. Determine which areas you want to focus on in your study, and then go look for references to help you prepare.
Got it. Thanks. And then one last question around the domains that you're referencing. The question is, do you imagine a convergence of these conceptual and practical domains? And if so, with which organizations might PMI be collaborating?
Well, I think that I may not be understanding the question fully. So let me pose an answer, and if it's not hitting the mark, let's clarify the question more. Yeah, it would be like, let me see if I can think. Well, let me use this example. 2017, we published the Agile Practice Guide. That was not just PMI developing the practice guide. We actually did that in cooperation with the Agile Alliance. So the 2 organizations worked together to produce something that PMI happens to publish, but was the work of 2 organizations. So I think maybe what you're saying there is, yeah, there's other work that PMI will be exploring. Where does it make sense to go partner with somebody who's got deeper expertise in this space, that we can help to put together something that will be good for both industries? So I use another example, and I'm just drawing this out of the air. I'm not saying there's anything in the works, but I've talked about teams as a project performance domain. Team also has an element in the principles. Well, teams are people, and you have to lead people. So maybe we find some organizations that have some deep expertise, and we partner to develop something around developing leadership skills. So those will happen. It's not going to change the performance domains. At least I don't envision that would be the case. I think the development team did a great job of trying to put together these 8 as representative of all projects. But yeah, there's openness all the time at PMI to, hey, if there's another organization that has some that we can benefit from working with, and they can benefit from working with us, let's go figure it out. That's one of the things I was doing early on in my days with PMI, was looking at some of those things. So did that get to the question, or do we get clarification?
I got the question from somebody that's just attending, so I just read the question. If they still need clarification, I'll just wait for feedback from them. And if not, then you answered it. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, and please go ahead and clarify, because we've got, I guess, got a couple more slides, and then we'll come back around to more questions. So let me talk about PMI Standards Plus, and I'm going to just give you a very quick description of it. And in fact, I'm going to use screen captures here, which are already out of date. So I highly recommend that you note the URL at the bottom. If you are a PMI member, this is part of your member benefit. So go register. It's easy. Just standardsplus.pmi.org. You register, and it's single sign-on. So if you're already PMI member, you use one sign-on credential, and it goes. It will take you in here. But the idea, as I said, they were trying to pull together a way to make the standards and guides searchable, because as you know, paper's hard to navigate when you're looking for a very specific thing. Indexes are helpful, table of contents are helpful, but I left my book on my desk and I'm over here at a satellite site. I don't have it, but I really need to see some information I know I read in there. You've got your tablet, you've got your iPhone, your Android device, whatever, your laptop. You just log into PMI Standards Plus and you can search the entire standards, well, eventually all of our standards and guides. Certainly right now, PMBOK Guide 6th edition, that's where they started. And it includes real world examples of how are other practitioners putting this stuff into use. Give me some examples. And case studies are something that we hear a lot that are desired. And I get that, because kind of walking through somebody else's experience, there are points of kind of this aha moment where that's what I'm dealing with. What did they do? How did they solve that? Or how did they go about working their way through that? That's what a case study can be, very, very useful. So maybe find that. Maybe you're just looking for a template. I just need to get a quick start on something, and I need a template to help me jumpstart this thing. Well, they're there, they're downloadable, and they're native to their platform. So if it's a Word document, it's a Word document. If it's an Excel spreadsheet, it's an Excel spreadsheet. It's not a PDF that ends up being a piece of paper again. We've wanted this to be digital all the time. It's digital. But one of the advantages here is that it allows real-time updates. At any point, new content can be pushed in, content can be revised, and it's in a continuous development mode now. So there's work that has been going on to take user feedback and evolve the platform based on what we're hearing. When you do a search on the site, if you don't come up or don't find what you're looking for, there's a way to give that feedback to the team and say, hey, here's what I was looking for. I couldn't find that. Then they will collect that, and that begins to give them an idea of what they need to develop next and put up on the site. And the idea is to get to a point where we can fairly quickly respond to those observations. So that's the idea. Here's what it used to look like, and it's going to look very different within a couple of days because they're launching are moving to production with new code. But this is basically the idea. So what you see here is on the right-hand side, scrollable. If you want to just sit and scroll through all the content, more power to you. You can do that. This is what's known in the web terms as a continuous feed. And so you will work through everything that's in there, but it will take you quite a while. Probably not the best way, but it is scrollable. And when you get your search results back, you do want that, because you want to be able to just quickly scroll through what results did I get, which ones look like they might be of use. So that's one way to navigate the site. The other thing I want to call out is this account tab. This is not just the login information. This is linking with my PMI. So there's work going on to fully integrate those. But the real key thing here, I think, is exciting, is that I don't know how many times I have been doing web search research, and 5 clicks away later, I realized that I don't know how to get back to what I saw, but I wanted to save that and I forgot to bookmark it. This is saving as you go. So we, under the accounts area, you will populate what we call playlists, what your most recent searches were and what things you viewed, right? So you have that element there. The playlists allow you to begin to set up folders to say, well, I know I looked at 3 or 4 pieces. I want to come back and think about this later. around integration management. And so you just drop them to that playlist and then come back later and open that playlist and you can look at it. They're there for as long as you want to maintain that playlist. So that's the idea. The account is more than just your profile. The account is about helping you manage the content that you're discovering on this site. So how do I find the content? Well, I can certainly do a keyword search. So I can just type in, I want templates, all kinds of templates. Give me all of them. Well, that's fine. And it will return anything that is tagged as a template. A more effective way might be to use the filters. And this is a drop down, or this takes you to a second page, and it looks like this. So you can see I had typed in templates, and that's why that is already checked. I hadn't cleared that when I went into filters, so it's still there. But you can see that we're looking at approach, industry, and format. You can select any combination of these. So you may want, I want to see agile and hybrid and how that maybe is being used in energy and utilities and in healthcare, because I've got work going on in both, or our organization has work going on in both areas or whatever. And I only want case studies or articles right now. That's fine. That's what you will get back. So it allows you to very quickly narrow down. What you see here is in that format section, there's a call out, PMBOK Guide 6th edition. This is where you will see a number of excerpts put together. So you're looking at what I call a card. So if I go back to this view, this item right here in front is a card. It's a thing. There's information below you can't see because I cut it off, but view more would show you the whole thing, right? Up in the top right, you see view source. That is the standard or the guide that's related to this particular card, or the multiple standards or guides where that's related. And it will give you the excerpts out of that. So I can read through with pieces here and there of content from a particular guide or standard, or I can look at view source and say, where is that covered exactly about risks in agile projects? Well, view source will tell you what particular standards or guides, and it will show you what that looks like in those particular publications. So that's my run through. Again, I encourage you to go to standards.project or -projects to see a lot more information, and you can determine what you're most interested in and follow that. And I'll stop there and see if we have any other questions.
Yeah, Marvin, we did get a couple there. The first one is the PMI site available only for PMI members?
It is a benefit. It's a member benefit for members, but there is a subscription model available if you're not a member. And don't quote me because I don't live in this application every day. I'm focused on the PMBOK guide right now. I believe it's $8 a month, payable with PayPal. But go look there and it will talk you through.
Okay, thanks for that. And then the next question is, will Standards Plus replace www Projectmanagement.com at some point?
No, Projectmanagement.com has its roots and continues to focus on community. So it's community, it's practitioners talking with practitioners, and that's what they want it to be. And it's been very successful with this, with that. This is about specific content related to standards and guides. So here we're trying to pull together information and resources that specifically amplify what's in the standards and guides.
Okay, thanks for sharing.
Sure.
Does anybody else have any other questions or anything that they want to ask Marvin while we have him here? All right, taking silence as no, everybody's got what they need. So let me just say, we hope that you gained a greater understanding of the PMBOK 7th edition, and want to say thank you for attending. Thank you, Marvin, for sharing with us. And I just want you to look forward to a follow-up email with links to resources and a short survey that will help us improve the PMUG experience. Enjoy the rest of the week and have a good night. All right, thanks everyone. Thanks
Doug.
Marvin.